Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Henry Q. Wifflebottom here with you again, and we're bringing you some literary treats. Tonight we're going to continue on with Dawnthief by James Barclay. We finished chapter 1 the other night, and now we're going to move on to chapter 2. "Who are these Dragonine then?" hissed Surinder. Ilka turned to him. "All mages. They have, I don't know, an affinity, with dragons." He gestured uselessly. "No, I don't bloody know. Dragons don't exist. They're just rumour and myth." Surinder's voice was still barely more than a whisper. "Oh yeah? Well, that's one hell of a big myth I can see in there." Ilka's ears pricked. "Does it really matter?" The unknown's voice, though quiet, still carried all of its power. "We only have one question that needs answering now." The Raven trio and Denser were all crowded around the partially open door to the dragon's chamber, animosity forgotten for a while. Herod sat with his back to them, his hands on the floor behind his back, and his legs drawn half up. The dragon's head was scant feet from the barbarians, the huge mound of its body resting on the ground, its wings folded. It was the scale of it all that Ilka found so hard to take in. Never mind that he had only half believed the books and the teaching. He had still imagined dragons, and he imagined they would be big. But Herod looked so tiny in comparison that he had to look away and back before he decided that Surinder was wrong and they weren't seeing an illusion. And still he didn't really believe it. "He should be dead," muttered the unknown, his hands tightening and untightening around the hilt of his sword. "Why hasn't it killed him?" "We think they're talking," said Denser. "What?" Ilka couldn't hear a thing. As far as he was concerned, they were just staring at each other. But as Ilka watched, his powerful eyes giving the scene complete clarity, Herod shook his head and straightened his back so he could use his hands to make a gesture. He indicated behind him and said something that the mage couldn't pick out the words. The dragon cocked its head to one side and opened its mouth, revealing the massed ranks of its fangs. Liquid dripped to the floor and Herod started. "What do you mean, we?" demanded Surinder. Denser didn't reply. "Later, Surinder," said the unknown. "We have to think of something to do. Quickly." What the hell can they be talking about? No one had an answer. Ilka looked back to the unreal scene in the huge chamber, and a glint caught his eye. For a moment he assumed it was a reflection off the dragon's beautiful scales, but it wasn't a golden colour, more a steel or a silver. He stared hard, using all the range that his eyes afforded him, and there it was. A small disc, maybe a palm's width across, and attached to a chain which seemed to be caught around one of the dragon's large hind-foot claws. He pointed it out to Denser. "Where?" asked the other mage. "Its right foot, third talon along." Ilka pointed the way. Denser shook his head. "Those are good eyes, aren't they? Hold on." Denser mumbled a few words and rubbed a thumb on either eye. He looked again and tensed. "What is it? Don't try to... Just pray Herod keeps talking," said Denser, and he began mumbling again. "What are you talking about?" hissed Ilka. "What have you seen?" "Trust me, I can save him," said Denser, "and just be ready to run." He took a pace forwards and disappeared. "Look, this is really hard for me to take in," said Herod. The dragon put its head on one side and stretched its jaws a little. A line of saliva dripped from a fang, and Herod moved his leg reflexively to avoid it. "Explain," ordered the dragon, the word bypassing the barbarian's ears on its way to thump through his skull. "Well, you have to understand that never in my wildest drunken dreams did I ever imagine I'd be sitting and talking to a dragon." He gestured and raised his eyebrows. He trailed off. The dragon flared its nostrils, and Herod felt his hair move in the breeze of its breath. He had to fight himself not to gag at the smell, rotten with that burned sourness. "And now?" it asked. "I'm absolutely terrified." Herod felt cold. He was still shivering intermittently, and he felt as though his sweat was freezing on his body, yet the room was hot, very hot. Large fires crackled and snapped in 10 grates set around the far half of the hall, surrounding the dragon on 3 sides, and the beast himself was sitting in what looked like soft wet mud. He rested back on his hands once again. Fear is healthy, as is knowing when you are beaten. That is why you are still alive. The dragon twitched its left wing. So tell me, what are you doing here? We were chasing someone. He came in here. Yes, I thought that you would not be by yourself. Who were you chasing? The barbarian couldn't help but smile. The whole situation was getting quite beyond him. Although he was sure, talking to a beast he had only heard of in rumour, he couldn't dispel the idea that it was all some kind of illusion. Something with a sensible explanation, anyhow. A mage. His men killed one of my friends. We want him. Have you seen anyone? Said Herod. It was simply too much. Look, I'm sorry, but I'm having trouble even believing you exist. The dragon laughed, or at least it was a sound that Herod thought was laughter. It boomed around his skull like waves striking a cliff, and he jutted and closed his eyes as the pain that followed smashed at his brain. And then those fangs were inches from his face, and the nostrils blew gouts of hot air into his eyes. Herod started violently, but before he could experience the shock of the dragon's speed of movement, it twitched its head up, catching him on the point of his jaw. He was hurled backwards to slide across the tiles, coming to rest, dazed. He sat up and massaged his chin, blood running from a deep graze. And now, little man, do you still have trouble believing I exist? No, I don't think so, and nor should you. Seren believes in me, although he has failed me now, and your friends beyond that door, I am sure they believe. The dragon's voice inside his head was louder now. Herod got to his feet and walked towards the beast, shaking his head to clear his mind of the fog that encased it. Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend. Herod's heart was pounding in his throat once more. Another sound from the dragon. Perhaps another laugh, but this time it sounded dismissive somehow. But you questioned my very existence, said the dragon. Perhaps you are lucky that I am slow to offend, or perhaps that I am slow to question yours. Herod tried to slow his breathing and think, but there seemed no way out. The only question remaining was how long before the dragon tired of the game and snuffed out his life. Yes, Herod shrugged and waited to die, but you must understand that you were the last thing I expected to find here. Ah, feelings of amusement arose in Herod's mind. Then I have disappointed you. Perhaps I should be apologizing to you. The dragon laughed again, more quietly this time, more in thought than in mirth. There was a faint rustling by Herod's left ear, then a voice, just audible. Don't react to my voice, and don't say anything. I am Denser, the man you are after, and I'm trying to help you. He paused. So when I say run, run hard. Don't argue, and don't look back. Now, little man, ask me a question. What? Herod blinked and returned his attention to the dragon, amazed that he could forget, however momentarily, that it was there. Ask. There must be something you want to know about me. The dragon withdrew its head somewhat, its neck arching high above the mound of its body. All right then. Why didn't you kill me? Because your reaction in putting up your sword set you as different from other men I have encountered. It made you interesting, and very few humans are interesting. If you say so. So what are you doing here? Resting, recovering. I am safe here. Herod frowned. Safe from what? The dragon shifted. Moving its hind feet slightly further apart, it placed its head on the floor once more and stared deep into Herod's eyes, blinking slowly. My world is at war. We are devastating our lands and there is no end in sight. When we need to recover our strength, we use safe havens like this. And where exactly is this? Herod's gaze took in the high roof and the scale of the chamber. At least you have the sense to know you are not in your own dimension. I've no idea what you're talking about with dimensions, I'm sorry. All I know is that Tarrenspike Castle does not have a room this size. The dragon chuckled again. So simple. If only you knew the effort it took for you to stand here. It lifted its head slightly and shook it from side to side, closing its eyes. It spoke again without opening them. The moment you left Seren's chambers, you entered a robing room. That room is not placed in any one dimension, neither is this chamber or the prayer chamber you also must have seen. If you like, this is a corridor between dimensions, yours and mine. Its existence is reliant on the fabric of your dimension remaining intact. Now the head raced in again, the dragon's wings bracing slightly to compensate for the sudden movement. My brood serves as protectors for your world, keeping you from the attentions of enemy broods and withholding from you that which should never have been created. Why do you bother? Do you think it is for any liking of your insignificant peoples? Very few of you are worthy of our respect. It is simply that if we allowed you the means to destroy yourselves and you succeeded in doing so, we would lose our haven forever. That is also why the door to your world is kept closed. Other broods might otherwise choose to travel here to rule. Herod thought on that for a moment. So what you're saying is that you hold the future for us all? The dragon raised the bone ridges that served as its eyebrows. That is certainly one conclusion you could reach. Now, what is your name? Herod Coldheart. And I am Shah Khan. You are strong, Herod Coldheart. I was right to spare you and to speak to you, and I will know you again. But now I must have rest. Take your companions and go. The entrance will be sealed behind you. You will never find me again, though I may find you. As for Seren, I will have to find another to serve me. I have no time for a dragonine who cannot secure my sanctuary. It took the barbarian several heartbeats to take in what he had just heard, and he still didn't believe it. You're letting me go? Why not? Run, Herod. Run now. The dragon's head swept from the floor at speed, eyes ablaze, searching for the source of the new sound. But Densa remained invisible. Herod hesitated. Run! Densa shouted, the voice some way to Herod's left. The barbarian looked up at Shah Khan, and their eyes met for an instant. He saw raw fury. Oh no, he breathed. The dragon broke eye contact to look down at its right hind foot. Herod turned and ran. No! Now Shah Khan's voice was there for all to hear, and it echoed from the walls. Give back what you have taken from me! Over here! Shouted Densa, and as Herod glanced right, the mage appeared briefly some 30 paces right along the wall from the double doors. The dragon cocked its head and breathed in his direction, fire scorching a wall, rolling up to the ceiling and incinerating wood and tapestry, but Densa had already disappeared. An oppressive wave of heat washed over Herod. He stumbled, crying out, gasping momentarily for breath, the roar of the flame and its detonation in the air shaking him to his core. The entire hall seemed to be ablaze. The sweat beaded on his face. Through the smoke and burning threads of tapestry, he saw the unknown appear at the door, holding it open for him. A shadow passed through it, and then he heard the dragon rise to its feet. The unknown paled visibly. Run, Herod, run! He screamed. The dragon took a pace forward and then another, Herod feeling the ground shudder beneath its feet. Bring back what you have stolen! It boomed. Herod made the door. Close it! Shouted the unknown. He and Surinder leant their weights against it. Go, go! They scrambled for the doors into the central chamber. Ilka and Densa sprinted away with Surinder in close pursuit. Shah Khan breathed again, and the huge double doors exploded inwards, fragmenting, sending wood and metal against the walls to splinter, twist, and smoulder. The shock sent Herod sprawling, and he crashed into the wall that backed the unlit fireplace, burning shards of wood covering the floor in his boots, the intense heat suffocating him. He lay confused for a second, seeing nothing but flame, then looked straight at Shah Khan as the dragon drew more air into its lungs, its head thrust through the wreckage of the crested doors. The barbarian closed his eyes, waiting for the end, but a hand reached round and grabbed his collar, hauling him to his feet and through the right hand of the two doors into the central chamber. The unknown dragged him under the overhang of the fire grate as twin lances of flame seared through the openings, one to either side of them, disintegrating wood and howling away towards the opposite wall, melting the metal of the dragonine crest above the fire to the right. "Come on, Herod, it's time to leave," said the big warrior, and he pushed Herod towards the exit passage after the rest of the retreating party. "Bring back the amulet!" roared Shah Khan. "Herod Coldheart, bring back the amulet!" Herod hesitated again, but the unknown shoved him into the passage as another burst of flame lashed the large chamber, its pulse of heat stealing breath and singeing hair. "Quickly!" shouted Surinder from up ahead. "This exit is closing, we can't hold it!" The two men upped the pace, tearing down the passageway and into the robing room. Another roll of flame boiled into the prayer chamber, its tendrils lashing down the passage, licking at Herod's back, the heat crinkling leather. Down the short entry tunnel, Herod could see Ilka, arms outstretched, sweating in the light of a lantern as whatever spell he had cast kept the door at bay. But as he ran, he could see it inching closer. Ilka sighed and closed his eyes. "He's losing it!" yelled Denser. "He's losing it! Run faster!" The door was sliding closed, the mage's bedroom disappearing with every step. Shah Khan's howls were loud in their ears. The unknown and Herod made it through, bowling Ilka onto the floor as they did so. The door closed with a dull thud, and the dragon's voice was silenced. Ilka, Herod, and the unknown picked themselves up and dusted themselves off. The barbarian nodded his thanks to the big man, who in turn nodded at the now closed entrance. There was nothing, no mark in the wall at all to suggest that there had ever been a door there. We were in another dimension. I know the proportions were all wrong in there. "Not exactly another dimension," corrected Ilka. "Between dimensions is more accurate, I think." He kneeled by the prone mage. Well, well, well. Seren, a dragonine. He felt for a pulse. Dead, I'm afraid. And he won't be the only one. Herod turned on Denser. "You should have run while you had the chance." He advanced, sword in hand, but Denser merely shrugged and continued to stroke the cat in his arms. "Herod." The unknown's voice was quiet but commanding. The barbarian stopped, his eyes still locked on Denser. "The fight is over. If you kill him now, it's murder. His little adventure killed Ras. It might have killed me too. Remember who you are, Herod. We have a code." The unknown was standing at his shoulder now. "We are the Raven." Eventually Herod nodded and put up his sword. "Besides," said Ilka, "he's got a lot of explaining to do." "I saved your life," said Denser, frowning. Herod was on him in a moment, pinning his head to the wall with a forearm under the chin. The cat hissed and scrambled to safety. "Save my life?" The barbarian's face was inches from Denser's. "That's your phrase for having me all but burned to a crisp, is it? The unknown saved my life after you risked it. You ought to die for that alone." "How?" protested the mage. "I got its attention to let you run." "But there was no need, was there?" Herod grunted as he saw confusion in Denser's eyes. "It was letting me go, Zetex man." Herod stepped back a pace, releasing the mage, who felt his neck gingerly. "You risked my life just to steal. I hope it was worth it." He turned to the rest of the Raven. "I don't know why I'm wasting my breath on this bastard. We have a vigil to observe." Oh, God, he's fantastic. Alun shoved the note across the table, his hand shaking. More hands covered his. They were strong and comforting. "Try to be calm, Alun. At least we know they are alive, so we have a chance." Alun looked into the face of his friend Thrawn, whose powerful body was squeezed the other side of the table. Thrawn was huge, better than 6 feet in height, with massively powered shoulders and upper body. His heavy features sprang from a young face, and his shining, clean blonde hair was gathered in a ponytail which reached halfway to his waist. He was regarding Alun with yellow-ringed, deep green eyes, earnest and concerned. He flicked his head, the ponytail swishing briefly into view, and looked around the inn. It was busy with lunchtime traffic, and the noise of the patrons ebbed and flowed around the table. Tables were scattered around the timbered floor, and here and there, booths like the one in which they sat gave an element of privacy. "What does it say, Will?" Thrawn's voice, as deep and gravelled as his barrel chest might suggest, cut through Alun's misery. He removed his hands from Alun's. Will sat next to him, a small man, wiry, bright-eyed and black-bearded, thinning on top. Will pulled at his nose with thumb and forefinger, his brows arrowing together as he read. Not a lot. Your mage wife has been taken for questioning concerning the activities of the Dordovan College. She will be released unharmed, assuming she cooperates, as will your sons. There will be no further communication. So we know where she is then, said the third member of the trio whom Alun had enlisted. An elf, Jander, was young, with a long and slender face, clear blue oval eyes and a short tidy blonde beard that matched the colour of his cropped hair. Yes, we do, agreed Thrawn, and we know how far we can trust the words on that note. He licked his lips and shoveled another forkful of meat into his mouth. You've got to help me! Alan's eyes flicked desperately over them all, never coming to rest. Thrawn looked right and across. Both Will and Jander inclined their heads. We'll do it, said Thrawn through his chewing, and we'll have to be quick. The chances of him releasing them are very slim. Alun nodded.
You really think so?
Asked Will. The boys are mage twins, said Thrawn. They will be powerful, and they are Dordovan. Alun will tell you himself. When they've finished with Arian, they will probably kill them. We have to get them out. He looked back at Alun. It won't be cheap. Whatever it costs, I don't care. Of course, I'll work for nothing, said Thrawn. No, my friend, you won't. A half smile cracked Alun's face. Tears glinted in his eyes. I just want them home. And home they will be. Now. Thrawn rose. I'm taking you home. You rest, we'll plan, and I'll be back later in the day. Thrawn helped Alun from the bench, and the two men walked slowly from the inn. Richmond and Talon had moved Rass's body to a quiet chamber carved out of the mountain into which the castle was built. Candles burned next to him, one for each point of the compass. His face was clean and shaven, his armour sewn and washed, his arms lay by his sides, and his sword in its scabbard was laid along his body from his chin to his thighs. Richmond did not look up from his kneeling position as Hirid, Surinder, the Unknown, and Ilka entered. Talon, standing by the door, inclined his head to each of them as they passed him. Ranged around the central table on which Rass lay, the Raven, heads bowed, paid their respects to their fallen friend. Each man remembered, each man grieved, but only two spoke. As the candles burned low, Richmond stood and resheathed his sword. My soul, I pledge to your memory. I am yours to command from beyond the veil of death. When you call, I shall answer. While I breathe, these are my promises. His last was a bitter whisper. I wasn't there. I'm so sorry. He looked to the Unknown, who nodded and moved to the table, walking around it. Beginning at Rass's head, he snuffed the candles as he reached them. By north, by east, by south, by west. Though you are gone, you will always be Raven, and we shall always remember. The gods will smile on your soul. Farewell in whatever faces you now and forever. Again silence, but now in darkness. Denser remained in Saren's chambers. The dead mage was lying on his bed under a sheet. For his part, Denser couldn't work out why he was still alive, but he was grateful. The whole of Balea would be grateful, but no city would be breathing easier than Zetex that the barbarian had been stopped. The cat nuzzled his legs. Denser sagged down the wall and sat. I wonder if this really is it, said Denser, turning the amulet over and over in his hands. I think it is, but I have to know. The cat gazed into his eyes. No clue there. The question is, do we have the strength to do it? The cat jumped into his cloak, nestling into the warmth of Denser's body. It fed. Yes, said Denser. Yes, we do. He closed his eyes and felt the mana form around him. This would be difficult, but he had to know. A communion over such a distance was a strain on mind and body. Knowledge and glory would come at a price if they came at all. They buried Ras outside the castle walls, branding the ground with the raven mark, a simple profile of the bird's head, single eye enlarged and wing curved above the head. All but Richmond left the graveside tired and hungry. For the lone warrior, kneeling in the cool damp of a windy, moonless night, the vigil would last until dawn. Sitting at a table in the huge kitchens, Ilka described the events through the dimension door to Talon. It was only then that Herod started to shake. Picking up his mug of coffee from the table, he stared at it wobbling in his hands, liquid slopping out over his fingers. "You all right?" asked Surinder. "I'm not sure," said Herod. "I don't think so." He raised the mug to his lips but couldn't close his mouth on it. The coffee dribbled down his chin. His heart slammed in his chest and his pulse thumped in his neck. Sweat began to prickle his forehead and dampen his armpits. Images of Shah Khan's head flooded his mind. That and the fire all around him hemming him in. He could feel the heat again, and it made his palms itch. He dropped the mug. "God's in the ground, Herod. What's wrong?" Surinder's voice betrayed alarm. The barbarian half smiled. He must have looked as terrified as he felt. "You need to lie down." "Give me a moment," said Herod. "I don't think my legs will carry me anyway." He glanced around the table. They were all staring at him, their food forgotten. He shrugged. "I didn't even believe they existed," he said in explanation. "So big, so huge, and right here." He put a quivering palm in front of his face. "Too powerful, I can't..." He broke off, shuddering the length of his body. Plates and cutlery on the table rattled. Tears fogged his vision and he felt his heart trip-hammering. He swallowed hard. "What did it talk about?" asked Ilka. "Loud. He thundered in my head," said Herod. "He talked about dimensions and portals and he wanted to know what I was doing. Funny. That huge and he cared what I was doing. Me. I'm so small, but he called me strong." He shivered again. "He said he'd know me. He had my life. He could have crushed me just like that, snuffed me out. Why didn't he? I wish I could remember everything." "Herod, you're mumbling," said Surinder. "I think we should leave this for another time." "Sorry, I think I'll lie down now if you'll help me." "Sure thing, old friend." Surinder smiled. He pushed back the bench and helped Herod to shaky feet. "Gods, I feel like I've been sick for a week." "You've been sick all your life." "Sod off, Lan." "I would, but you'd fall over." "Make sure he drinks plenty of hot, sweet liquid," said the unknown as the friend shambled past. "Nothing alcoholic." Is the ZX mage still here?" asked Herod. The unknown nodded. "In Saren's chambers," said Ilka. "Asleep. Hardly surprising after the casting he's done today. He won't be leaving until after I've spoken to him." "You should have let me kill him." The unknown smiled. "You know I couldn't." "Yes. Come on, Lan, or I'll collapse where I'm standing." The two men sat in low chairs either side of the fire, long dead. Night hurried to engulf the college city of Zetex, and in response, lanterns glowed, keeping the dark at bay and lighting up the massed shelves of books that stood at every wall in the small study. On a desk kept meticulously tidy, a single candle burned above the ribboned and titled sheaves of papers. Far below the study, the college quietened. Late lectures took place behind closed doors, spells were honed and adjusted in the armoured chambers of the catacombs, but the air outside was still. Beyond the walls of the college, Zetex still moved, but as full night fell, the movement would cease. The city existed to serve the college, and the college had in the past exacted a heavy price for its own existence. Inns would lock their doors, patrons staying until first light. Shops and businesses feeding off those who fed off the college would shutter their windows. Houses would show no light or welcome. No longer did protectors issue from the college to snatch subjects for experiment. And no longer did Zetex mages use their own people for sacrifice in mana charge ceremonies. But old fears died hard, and rumours would forever fly through the markets that bustled by day but echoed silent at night. As darkness fell, a malevolent quiet still emanated from the college in a cloying cloud of apprehension and anxiety like fog rolling in from the sea. Countless years of blood ritual would never be forgotten, and forever hearts would quicken at the sound of wood splintering in the distant dark, and cries would be stifled as footsteps were heard slowing by locked doors. Dread ran through the veins of Zetesk, and the foreboding receded only with the lightening of the sky on a new morning. It made the job of city guards simple, as at dusk they closed the gates of the only fully walled city in Balea and patrolled the empty streets. Fear stalked the alleyways as it had done for centuries, but now it was a legacy. It had no substance. Change was slow and the city was suffocating. Few native Zeteskians had left to enjoy the freedom granted them by the latest Lord of the Mount as his first action on assuming the mantle of the college's ruling mage. And in the 12 years since, Stillion had encountered nothing but reluctance to cast aside the old ways, as if his people drew perverse comfort from living in fear of everyone they met. Yet now, his failure to change the collective will and mind of his people would work to his advantage. Stillion was an imposing figure, well in excess of 6 foot, with the body of a 40-year-old disguising his true age of somewhere over 50. His hair, receding halfway across his skull, was long, dark and brushed hard into a ponytail that reached beyond his shoulders. He wore dark trousers and a shirt of deepest blue, and his cloak of office, gold-trimmed black, was draped about his shoulders. His nose was long and thin, his jaw set harsh, and his cold green eyes scared all they looked upon. "I take it she escaped Terranetza unharmed?" asked his companion across the fireplace. Stillion blinked several times and shook his head to clear his mind of his reverie. He regarded Naya, a senior aide and archmage, for a few moments, remembering the old maxim concerning where to keep your friends and enemies. He thought he had Naya, a wily political animal and sharp thinker, placed about right. Yes, she did, just, and now she's well clear. He shivered at the memory of his recent contact with Celine, anxious for the mage spy's safety. Even under a cloaked walk, she had been at risk from those she watched, and the manner of her escape from Terranetza, a small Westman farming community not far west of the Blackthorn Mountains, would trouble his dreams that night. He reached a slightly tremulous hand down to a low table and picked up his wine, a deep and heavy red that had not kept as well as he'd hoped. He felt tired. Communion over such a range sapped the strength, and he knew he would need to visit the catacombs for prayer later that evening. "But something is troubling you, my lord." Stillion pursed his lips, knowing any reluctance to speak would be taken by Naya as a personal slight. He couldn't afford that. Not yet. "She saw everything we have been fearing. The Westmen are subjugating villages near the Blackthorns. She heard the shaman offer them life for crops and obedience. The evidence is just overwhelming. They are massing armies. They are united, and the shaman magic is strong." Naya nodded, pushing his hand through his long greying hair. "And Parv?" he asked. "I have asked her to travel there." "Celine?" "Yes. There is no one else, and we must have answers." "But, my lord, I am well aware of the risks, Naya," snapped Stillion. His expression softened immediately. "My apologies." "Not at all," said Naya. He placed a comforting hand briefly on Stillion's knee. "We must be so careful now," said Stillion, after another sip of wine. "Are our watchers sure the witch lords are still held?" Naya breathed out a long, sighing sound. "We believe so." "That isn't good enough." "Please, Stillion, let me explain." Naya's use of his lord's name was against protocol, but Stillion let it go. Naya was an old mage who rarely followed etiquette. "The spells to determine that the witch lords are still in the mana cage are complex and are nearing completion for this quarter. Delays have been caused through unusually high activity in the interdimensional space in which the cage is located." "When will we have an answer?" Stillion pulled an embroidered cord next to the fireplace. In the next few hours, a day at most, Naya raised his eyebrows in apology. You know it's only a matter of time, don't you? My lord? The evidence is all there. Stillion sighed. The unification of the Westman tribes, Shaman at the head of war parties, armies building in the southwest. Must it be the Witch Lords? You really don't need me to answer that question, do you? Stillion smiled. Naya shook his head. There was a knock at the door. Come! Barked Stillion. A young man entered, short red hair riding above a face taut with trepidation. My lord? Bring up a fire and another bottle of this rather average Denebray red. At once, my lord. The young man left. The two senior majors paused in their conversation, contemplating the future and not liking what they saw. Can we stop them this time? Asked Naya. I fear that rather relies on your man, replied Stillion. At least as much as the timing of the Witch Lord's escape. He has reported, I take it. He has, and we now hold the amulet. Excellent! Stillion slapped the arm of his chair with the palms of his hands and rose. He walked over to the window, hardly daring to ask his next question. And? It is Septon's amulet. We can make progress now, assuming we get the right help. Stillion breathed deeply and smiled as he looked out of his tower high above the college. The tower dominated the college, and its encircling balcony gave him unrivaled views of the city and its surrounds. The night was cool but dry. A thin cloud was bubbling up from the southeast, threatening to obscure the countless thousands of stars whose pale light pinpricked the dark. The smell of oil fires and the heat of the city wafted on a slight breeze, not unpleasant to the senses. Beyond the college walls the quiet was growing. Stillion's tower was encircled by those of his 6 mage masters, but stood far taller. Looking down, he saw lights burning in Larian's tower too. The most recently appointed master, he was a man who would now have to join the inner circle, completing the 7-tower bond. This could mean everything to us, he said. Larian has worked hard, said Naya, coming to his side. He has earned the credit. And your man? He'll see the necessary help is obtained? I have every confidence. Stillion nodded and gazed out over Zetex. God, someone tell me the right pronunciation of that. At ease that his people would obey his every order without question. The first step had been successfully taken, but now the way would become fraught, and those who knew enough would have to be kept close. I think, Naya, that when the wine arrives, we may permit ourselves a small celebration. And that is the end of chapter 2. So, hope you enjoyed that one. Please check out chapter 1 before you go to chapter 2. Like us, subscribe, leave a comment, and anybody who has any different pronunciations for some of these names and places, please feel free to leave me a comment. One thing. Want to recommend a song that's been sitting in the background. A band called Snot. Brilliant. Song's called The Box. Check it out. Tune in a couple of days' time. See chapter 3. Henry Q. Wifflebottom saying good night.